Good afternoon. It is Friday, and that means it's time for our Lunch and Learn. Now today, Lunch and Learn is going to be a little bit different because we're going to step into the quantum physics arena, which is understandably a very difficult arena. You have to accept a lot of things by faith because quantum mechanics, quantum physics operates at a much higher frequency than what we see, what we feel, what we hear, maybe not what we feel, but we're going to be talking about consciousness. And so if you're like me, you spend some time on social media, you're hearing and seeing things of elevated consciousness or expand your consciousness or enlightened consciousness, right? So what actually is consciousness? So we understand the terms I'm conscious, I'm unconscious, right? Unconscious means you're out of it, you're asleep, you're not perceiving anything that's going on. Consciousness has to do with perception. We all know that, we all agree with that. But the consciousness I want to talk about today is a little bit higher than that. And a lot of times the human race believes that consciousness is in your brain. However, in the report that we're going to talk about today, we're going to see that people with no brains can have consciousness. So this is kind of a, hello, how do we make some reconciliation with this and what we think we know, and new science is coming out that is showing that we don't know all that we think we know and we don't understand it all correctly. So what is consciousness? So we think that, you look at something, light goes into your eye, it goes into your retina, it goes into the brain, it makes a picture, and then you remember, right? Consciousness is how you feel. Consciousness is what you think. Consciousness is a perception. So I have heard, I don't know, because I see blue this way, but I understand that other people don't see blue in the same way that I see blue, and it all has to do with consciousness. And so today we're going to talk about consciousness. Where does consciousness come from, right? We want to know what is that. A lot of times we think it's just in our brain, but there has been new research that shows that that is not exactly right. So the question is, how does the brain generate subjective perceptions, including images, feelings, experiences? This was coined by an Australian cognitive scientist, David Chalmers, in 1995 as, quote, the hard problem. How does consciousness exist? What makes consciousness? And it turns out that having a brain is not a prerequisite for consciousness. Now, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I read this because, I'm reminded of the Wizard of Oz and the Scarecrow, if I only had a brain, and I'm just thinking, yeah, we prize our brains, or I certainly do. I remember being a teacher and the students were asking me if I'd ever done Xanax or whatever drug du jour it was at the time. And I said, no. And they said, well, why not? And I said, because I am respectful of my brain, and I do not want to have any, chemicals in my brain that are not going to be, helpful for me. And so I've always had a good respect for my brain, but apparently, according to new research, you don't necessarily need a brain. And a Lancet recorded a case of a French man who was diagnosed with postnatal hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is excessive fluid on the brain or around the brain, and he had this diagnosis at 6 months. Normally, children with hydrocephalus are born that way, but he somehow developed this. But despite his condition, he grew up to be healthy. He was married, he had 2 children, and he worked as a civil servant. When he was 44 years old, he went to the doctor because of a mild weakness in his left leg. The doctors scanned his head thoroughly and discovered that his brain tissue was almost totally gone. Most of the space in his skull was filled with fluid with only a thin sheet of brain tissue. The doctor said the brain was virtually absent. The leader or the lead author of this case study was Dr. Lionel Follet. I think he was a French guy. He was of the Department of Neurology in Marseille, France. All right. The man had been living a normal life, productive life, had no problem seeing, feeling, or perceiving things, but his brain was almost totally non-existent. Now, the normal brain cortex is responsible for sense and movement, and the hippocampus is responsible for memory. Hydrocephalus patients lose or have significantly less volume in these brain regions, yet they can still perform all of these related functions. Even without substantial brains, these people can have above average cognitive function. So that really goes against everything that we know or we thought we knew. And when we say things like he's brainless, or, you know, if he only had half a brain, he could, right? We say these things, and we don't necessarily mean it ugly. We just, you know, are saying these things that we say. And we're finding out that people with half a brain or even no brain can still function in society, which is like blowing my mind, because we're taught that the brain is, you know, central command of the body. And if you don't have a brain, or if you have something wrong with your brain, then things are not going to work the way they're supposed to. So Professor John Lorber, he lived from 1915 to 1996. He was a neurologist from the University of Sheffield. He analyzed over 600 cases of children with hydrocephalus, water on the brain. Of those, he found that about half of 60 children with the most severe type of hydrocephalus and cerebral atrophy, shrinkage, brain shrinkage, had an IQ higher than 100, and they lived normal lives. And so I think the average IQ is like between 88 and 98. I think that's what I remember. So if you have an IQ of over 100, then you are, you know, special. And I don't mean that in a negative way, that you have a high IQ. And he found that these children that had brain shrinkage, they had a higher than average IQ. Among them, one university student excelled at his grades. He had first-class honors. He had a degree in mathematics, and he had an IQ of 126, which is all socially normal. This maths genius brain was only 1 millimeter thick, while the average person's brain is usually 4.5 centimeters thick. Okay? So that means that you and I, if we have our full brain function, our brain was 44 times bigger than this university student, right? And yet he still was able to function. He was a mathematic genius, and he had an IQ of 126. The important thing about Lorber is that he's done a series of long, systematic scanning rather than just dealing with anecdotes. That means he has had years and years and years of comparing the same people with the same conditions to find out what their function is. So Patrick Wall, from 1925 to 2001, he was a professor at the University College in London, and he was quoted as saying in an article by Roger Lewin, published in Science in 1981, discussing Lorber's article, "The cases with people without brains challenges the conventional teaching that brain structure is the basis for generating consciousness. Are our brains, weighing about 3 pounds, with roughly 2 billion neurons connected by about 500 trillion synapses, are they the real source of consciousness?" And you would have to question that when they have these 600 different cases that they've studied, and these people have very small brains or no brains, and they still have consciousness. They're still able to perform. They're still able to be productive in society. And so you're going to have to reconsider what we think of as consciousness. Some scientists have proposed that deep, invisible structures in the brain explain normal cognitive function even with severe hydrocephalus. These structures may not be easily visible on conventional brain scans or to the naked eye. However, the fact that they are not readily apparent does not mean they don't exist or they are not important to brain function. For hundreds of years, neurologists have assumed that all that is dear to them is performed by the cortex of the brain, but it may well be that deep structures within the brain carry out many of the functions assumed to be the sole providence of the cortex, Wall wrote in a 1981 article. These unknown deep structures, quote, are undoubtedly important for many functions. And this is according to neurologist Norman Greshwind. He died in 1984. He was from the Beth Israel Hospital affiliated with Harvard University, and he wrote this in the 1981 article. Furthermore, the deep structures are almost certainly more important than currently thought. David Boucher, a professor of neuropsychology at the University of Liverpool in the UK, he said that in the same 1981 article. So 1981 was a few years back, and they have known that consciousness does not necessarily arrive from your brain tissue the way we thought it did. The source of consciousness may exist in realms we have yet to explore. When medical theories cannot solve a mystery, physics might step in with a plot twist. And in this particular case, we're talking about quantum physics. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about quantum physics because that's the realm that I work in with vibrational medicine, right? Can you see vibrations? No, you cannot see vibrations unless, like on your television, right, the technology takes radio waves, whatever kind of waves they are, and it turns it into pictures that we can see. We know that light is energy. We know that sound is energy. You cannot see sound. You can see sometimes the effect of sound, and you can see the effect of light. Light hits something, it reflects an image, your brain converts that light energy into an image. And so when we're looking at quantum physics, you've got to go deeper than just what you can see. And so medically, when you go to the doctor will ask you what your symptoms are. He will label it as a disease or a dysfunction, and he will give you medication that will make that symptom go away. Okay, that is not true healing, but you feel better. You'll live longer, okay, because they've turned off that symptom. In holistic medicine, we deal more in the quantum field because we deal with frequencies. And so consciousness, what we're coming to understand, is a frequency, not necessarily something that is concrete. I read this book, I learned this information, my consciousness has it because it was something that is concrete that I did. Maybe not. We all have had the experience where we're sitting, we might be in a restaurant, we might be in a bar, we might be in a library, who knows, might be on the subway, and all of a sudden the hairs on the back of our neck will just stand straight up, we'll get a cold chill, we'll have a shiver or whatever. That is consciousness in the quantum realm. You didn't see anything, you didn't feel anything that you could recognize, but your whole body responded to it. So that is consciousness in the quantum field. And so when we're dealing with holistic medicine, certainly the kind of medicine that I do, we're working in the quantum realm because we are working with frequency. Now, some of you are going, oh, the lady's gone cuckoo, but I want to show you this just so you can have some kind of an understanding about consciousness. So I think this is probably backwards on your screen because it's alive. But these are, it says emotional vibration chart. And it has big vibrations, high vibrations, all the way to very low vibrations. And so you can see this is a really good depiction, low and tiny, large and high, okay? And so you can see the different colors respond to the colors on our light spectrum, our prism, and that kind of thing. And so at the very bottom, we have, I think it is shame at 20 hertz. Yes, and these are in hertz. At the very top, we have enlightenment, and I think it's at 700 plus hertz. So the higher we vibrate, the healthier we are. The higher we vibrate, the better emotions that we have. And so one of the things that we work with here is getting your vibratory frequencies at a high enough level that your body can heal. A healthy body resonates very highly. A sick body resonates very poorly, very low. We tell people when they come in that if they score low, which most people do on their initial visit with us, we say that you are on low battery mode. Now, why do I say that? Because people understand that their cell phone, their tablet, their laptop, whatever, they use it all throughout the day. It works fine, but if you're like me, at the end of the day, my phone is saying you're on low battery mode, plug me in, right? We all have had that experience. Well, our bodies do the same thing. We have had years of experience. We've had years of trauma. We've had years of alcohol abuse, drug abuse, who knows, just life, right? And so all of that weakens our frequencies. We, at the age of 50, we should start decompressing or decongesting is a better word, the liver, because the liver has a lot of contaminants in there because it is our filter. So we know when we are in our home and we've got to change the air conditioning filter, and you pull that filter out and you go, oh my God, look at all this nastiness that's in there. What was in the air? You were breathing it. Thank God you've got the filter, right? You have to change that, what is it, every 3 months? If you buy the high dollar ones, you're going to change it every 9 months maybe. So our liver is our biggest filter, and we have to not change the liver, but decongest the liver. Otherwise, we're going to be full of contaminants, which lowers the vibrational frequency. So what we're seeing, consciousness is not necessarily gray matter. It is more in the physics realm of frequency. And so this is why you have people with very small gray matter, almost non-existent in that one case, and yet still was able to perform cognitive functions, still able to perform perception, feelings, be a positive member of society because of the frequency that was going on in the body. So this is really very interesting because you cannot just look at neurons. According to Dr. Stuart Hammerhoff, who was the director of the Center of Consciousness Studies at the University of Arizona. He says, even single-cell organisms like paramecium, they have no brain, all right, they demonstrate purposeful behaviors such as swimming, avoiding obstacles, mating, and learning without having a single synapse or being part of a neural network. According to Hammerhoff, these intelligent, possibly conscious behaviors are mediated by microtubules inside the paramecium. These same microtubules are found in our brain neurons in all animals and plant cells. The microtubules, as the name suggests, are tiny tubes within the cells. They play an essential role in cell division, movement, intracellular transport, and appear to be the information carriers in the neurons. The proteins that make up these microtubules are, quote, the most prevalent or abundant protein in the whole brain, according to Hammerhoff. He hypothesizes that the microtubules are the key players in human consciousness. He says, because, this is a quote, when you look inside the neurons, you see all these microtubules, and they are in a periodic lattice, which is perfect for information processing and vibrations. So here we are. Vibrations are in the quantum field. They're not in the physical realm, although they do affect the physical realm. Just as I said earlier about you sitting wherever you're sitting and you got the little spiky hairs on the back of your neck because somebody nasty came in, right? And so you felt it, you perceived it, but you didn't perceive it with your eyes, you didn't perceive it with your ears, you didn't perceive it with your brain, you perceived it with something else, right? We've all been sitting there and all of a sudden we just have a shiver. That's a consciousness, but it didn't go through the brain, all right? He says, Dr. Hammerhoff says, because of their properties, these microtubules function as an antenna, okay? They serve as quantum devices to transduce consciousness from a quantum dimension, okay? So in simple terms, these microtubules act as a bridge between the quantum world and our consciousness. They take quantum signals, amplify them, organize them, and somehow, through processes we do not fully understand, turn them into the feelings and the perceptions and the thought that make up our conscious awareness. Microtubules can explain bewildering facts about the brain. Hammerhoff posits that the brains of individuals born with hypocephalus can adapt as their microtubules control neuroplasticity and reorganize their brain tissue. Now, neuroplasticity is the function of the brain that allows it to repair and reorganize itself. So you would think that people that are born with half a brain or with very little brain, as we saw in that example that was in the Lancet, that they would have a really hard time. But because of these microtubules, they're able to function the way they need to function, which is absolutely amazing to me. He says that over time, the microtubules in the brain rearrange themselves to sustain cognitive function and cognition. Therefore, according to Hammerhoff, our brains serve as information processors, receiving signals from the universe and forming them into consciousness. The brain processes information across multiple scales, each vibrating at a different frequency. So this is really important, and this is why functional medicine, vibrational medicine, bioenergetic medicine, all of which we do here, this is why this is really important, because the brain functions at these different frequencies, and if we can match the supplements to the frequency deficits that you have, we can raise those frequencies. So just like in our vibrational chart, if you've got a low frequency with shame, you can change that into a higher frequency of joy. And I think joy is 540 hertz, where shame is only 20 hertz. So you know that you can change your emotions. Right? It takes some doing. When you're down in the dumps, you're having a bad day, it's really hard to get your frequency up, right? And we do say, I have no energy today, or that situation sapped all my energy, and you're right. You're absolutely right. So the brain oscillates slowly at 0.5 hertz to 100 hertz. Individual neurons fire faster at 500 to 1,000 hertz. Inside the neurons, the microtubules vibrate much quicker in the megahertz range. At the tiniest quantum scale, okay, quantum physics, right? I'm not an expert in quantum physics, but at the tiniest quantum scale, frequencies reach incredibly high levels, theoretically up to 10 to the 43rd power. So that's an exponential. You guys know that exponentials are just mind-blowing, but your frequencies can be extremely high. This is where you have emotional experience. You have ecstatic experiences, whether it is sexual orgasm or a spiritual experience or whatever, right? It raises your frequency, it raises your megahertz, and you feel better. You do feel better. A body at a high frequency feels much better than a body at a low energy. So according to neuroscientist Hammerhoff and Nobel laureate Roger Penrose, Our brains serve as information processors getting signals from the universe. And the microtubules, the most abundant proteins in the neurons, act as a bridge to collect the waves from the quantum world and put them into our brains. Once processed in the brains, then consciousness is generated. So, across my desk this morning came this other report, and I don't have time to go into it, but I'm going to just give you something to chew on because it was like mind-blowing for me. It was a article about the water in your body is not H2O. It's H320, which is a totally different compound. And so I Googled this, and the first thing that came up was this is quackery, blah, 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 blah. But then I dug a little bit deeper. There is a scientist, a professor. His name is Professor Gerald Pollack. He is a bioengineer and scientist at the University of Washington, and he proved in his groundbreaking research, he discovered that water next to hydrophilic, water-loving surfaces, such as the lining of your blood vessels, your cells, organizes itself into a crystalline structure. It becomes thicker, more viscous, negatively charged, and it holds energy. So let me break that down a little bit. Your water turns itself into a crystalline substance. Why is that important? Because crystals, God made crystals. Crystals are in the earth. Quartz is a well-known crystal, right? Crystals refract light. They break up light into its various frequencies. The water in our body, if it is the right kind of water, if we are vibrating at a high enough level, it is going to take those frequencies and turn them into healing frequencies in our body, which is really, really important. He calls this water living water, okay? Guess who else talked about living water? Jesus Christ. When Jesus Christ was at the well with the Samaritan woman, he talked to her about living water. And so we really have to rethink our perspective of everything that is concrete is not all there is. There is a vast universe of quantum reality, quantum physics, and we have to vibrate at that level in order to match it. Now, one of the things that we do here in the clinic is we do homeopathic medications. Why do we do that? Because we know that homeopathic is frequency, and we know that if we can raise our frequencies that we're going to be healthy. So I just wanted to show you something that we have, and this says comprehensive detox and drainage. There's 6 little bottles. This package will last you for 60 days, right? It detoxes your brain, your spinal column, your gut, your kidney bladder, your liver, and your immune system, okay? This is frequency medicine. So if consciousness is frequency and health is frequency and emotions are frequency, science is catching up that our consciousness is frequency. So the higher we can raise our vibrational frequency through good clean water, good clean food, good clean rest, getting out in nature and the sea water, the sand, the sunlight, all the things, that recharges the battery and raises our vibrations. I don't know anybody who goes to the beach that says they feel awful at the beach. Everybody feels restful. Everybody feels energized. Everybody feels happier at the beach. Why is that? Because of the frequency. We don't feel good in our homes with our electromagnetic smog, with our 5G and all that kind of thing, because it counters the frequencies that are with health. And so we're going to be continuing this discussion, I think, a little bit, because people don't understand that thoughts are things, okay? Thoughts are things. We think thoughts are just, they fly in, they fly out. I heard one of my colleagues, and this was probably 20 years ago, tell me that thoughts are things. And I just had to think about that. But you know what? Jesus said, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And so Jesus said, frequency comes into the concrete world, right? So we need to expand our consciousness in all the ways, right? So that we can learn to vibrate at a higher level so that we can be who we're supposed to be and do all the good things that we're supposed to do. So a body functioning at a very low frequency is going to feel garbage. A body functioning at a high frequency is going to be really happy and joyful and that kind of thing. And, you know, you get to choose what frequency you want to vibrate at. But, you know, I want to have more consciousness. I want to be conscious of more things, right? And so in order to do that, according to what we're learning, we have to tap into that quantum physics realm and be able to match that frequency so that we can do better. So that is a lot. It's usually not what we talk about here in the clinic, but I was just so excited about the frequency of consciousness, the frequency of the medications that we do, the frequency of the testing that we do. It just all went together perfectly, okay? And it excited me. I hope it excited you. Thank you for liking, commenting, sharing, all the things, because I appreciate that. Thank you for honoring me with your presence during this lunchtime 30 minutes. And I will see you next week, God willing. Take care.